Hello everyone and welcome to the Female Filmmakers panel. My name's Anna Smith. I'm film critic and host of the Girls on Film podcast, which is a feminist film podcast, so I'm very happy to be doing this panel especially. And I've got three wonderful filmmakers with me. We might have another one showing up later, so she might make a grand entrance at some point. But for the moment we have Laura Samani, who made Small Body, what a fantastic film. Sadie Frost over here, who made Quant, and Sam Firth, who made The Wolf Suit. Welcome to you all.
Thank you.
Can I ask you individually first how it feels to have your film at London Film Festival? Laura, you first.
Amazing. No, I'm really happy to be here, especially because my sister lives in town.
Oh,
so
perfect.
I was really proud of having her at the screening, so yeah, it's amazing.
She came to the film.
Yeah, of course. It was
yes.
the second time, by the way, but yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, how
amazing.
wonderful. That
Yeah.
sounds fantastic. Well, congrats again.
Thank you.
And Sam, how are you feeling about this?
It's really exciting.
Yeah.
I had a short in a few years ago, and that was exciting enough. But I actually had my first paid job in the National Film Theatre in 1997. I shouldn't say that, but so to come back and return, like there's still some people at front of house are the same people, but to come back to the same cinema that I worked in a long, long time ago, it was just and show the film. Very exciting.
Did you feel a little bit emotional at that
I did,
point?
definitely. It was quite
I think I'd have been quite tearful. That sounds amazing.
Yeah, I said it before the film so I could then recover ready.
Good idea, yeah. Well, that's lovely. How do you feel?
Yeah, it was brilliant to be in a festival that's in London where I'm born and bred, and the documentary about Mary Quant, who was from London originally, and I've had other films recognised by different festivals in America or Edinburgh, and I think for me it was just so important this documentary because it's about the kind of British invasion and about London and the kind of the scene on the King's Road. It meant so much more to be kind of recognised by this festival.
Yeah, it's a perfect place to show it, isn't it? Yeah, fantastic. Well, we want to hear a bit more about your individual projects. So, Laura, I'll come to you. Now, congrats again on the film.
Thank you.
Very, very powerful film. But for people who haven't seen it, maybe you could set it up for us. Tell us a little bit more about it, but also why you wanted to tell this story.
Yeah. It's a period drama, apparently, and it's set in 1901, and it's the story of a young woman who lost the baby during the birth, so the baby is stillborn, and it was pretty common at the time. So what happens in Catholic culture is that if a baby is stillborn, you can't baptize the baby. And so the soul is condemned to be in limbo forever, so you will never unite with the soul of the baby. And what happens to Agatha, this is the name of the main character, is that she finds out that there is a sanctuary up on the mountains where, it has been said, some people can bring these stillborn babies back to life just for a time of one breath to baptize them. And so she embarks in this dangerous journey headed to the sanctuary. And the story is something that I've been told in 2016 because these sanctuaries, these pilgrimages were real. And in my region, I come from Italy, as you can tell from the accent, I'm so sorry for that.
It's a lovely accent.
Yeah, kind of, maybe for you, I don't know. I come from northeast Italy, so it's on the border with both Slovenia and Austria. And there were three of them, three sanctuaries, and one is still existing, even though it lost its original purpose, because since 2007, limbo doesn't exist anymore.
Oh, I didn't know that.
No,
they
the Pope
officially
decided. Yeah, the Pope decided that it's not existing.
It's just not anymore, because I went to Catholic school and it
Yeah.
existed then, yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Right, okay, good, because it is an extraordinary story.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, fascinating thing to explore, and you did beautifully, thank you. So tell me more about your films.
So my film's a documentary, first-person documentary, and the premise is really the film starts with me. There was a kind of contradiction between my memories of my early childhood and what my parents were telling me, and actually my parents were also both telling me very different stories. So it kind of starts as a film about memory, and then through the kind of process of interviewing my parents, I realised that I'm just hearing the stories as stories almost. So I end up reconstructing scenes from my parents' marriage based on the stories they've told me, with them there on set, and as documenting the conversations we're having while actors are playing them on set, and then it kind of explores their dysfunctional marriage and the why and how we all remember it differently.
It's an incredibly personal film. Bravo putting yourself out there. I know you said a little bit how it feels to have the film here, but how do you feel now people know so much about your life?
Well, I mean, so far only a few hundred people have seen it, I think. It's I mean, I've made personal films before, so I'm kind of at least used to having those films on the screen. But it is a very strange experience, and I mean, I kind of feel it's an important story, and that's the response I'm getting from the audience. But it also, you keep feeling, well, what have I done? And it's also, it's one thing to put myself on screen, but to put my parents on screen, I feel a weight of responsibility, if I'm honest, you know, which I'm still grappling with, you know.
But as you say, it does explore a lot of important themes,
Yeah,
you know, some of which are possibly spoilers to discuss, but I agree, yeah, some things that will resonate with a lot of people.
And they I think they both recognise that the film is important as well. So
that's really good to know. Yeah, you must be pleased about that.
Yes.
That's good. And Sadie, as you know, I'm a fan of the film Quant, about Mary Quant, but tell everyone a little bit more about the documentary.
So the documentary came to me, and it was an interesting project because I've had a background in film and in fashion, and I felt like I could get to know Mary quite well. And I found it quite unusual that a documentary had been made about her life when she did so much, and she was so much part of the British invasion. And I was talking to my daughter, who's 19 and at fashion school, and she didn't know who Mary Quant was. And I just felt like, even though there was the V&A exhibition and stuff, that was just like, you know, a travesty that people weren't going to really know about her, and that generation might be forgotten. So it's a documentary about her life, and I had the blessing from her family, and I worked closely with her son and her best friend, so I had all her peers in the film, and some people, fashion students and fashion scholars and historians, and to kind of do a big character study on Mary. And I think, I mean, it was the first documentary I've ever directed, and I just jumped in and worked hard, and I'm really pleased with the results. And it's entertaining, and it's fun, and it's lively, and got a great soundtrack. And I just wanted it to be entertaining. You know, I've worked on a lot of very bleak, dark things, and you know, it was just such even though the film's entertaining, the actual process of the last 2 years was very difficult, because I had like a lineup of older people, you know, who were going to be interviewed, and obviously the pandemic, they all couldn't be in, a lot of them couldn't be in the film. So, you know, it was interesting to kind of get it finished and made, but you know, we did, and it's getting released on the 29th of October.
Yeah, well, congrats again. And it's also a portrait of an era as well, you know.
Exactly, it's the whole era, and social studies, and the evolution, and how women's role has changed. And I think it is so shocking for young women now to see how women kind of were treated in the 50s and 60s, and how you know, someone like Mary liberated women, and the pill liberated women, and things like that.
Yeah, it's interesting to sort of people theorising about the miniskirt liberating people, and actually the kind of the clothes before that were kind of confining women. And yeah, really fascinating what that brings out. And that kind of brings me to feminism, because we're here, you know, women. And you know, what for you is important in your film in terms of specifically gender and the way that women certainly were treated in the era that you're sort of covering there?
As you know, a lot of things, mostly because according to all the documents that I've been studying before shooting, the men were taking the journey. So historically speaking, the men were traveling to the sanctuaries. So the very first question I asked to the co-writers was, what about the mother then? So this was the very first decision about the story, to decide that it was the mother to take the journey. And then, as you know, there is another character in the film which is gender fluid, I would say. And it was not the very initial purpose into the first draft, at least. But then, according to everything that happened during the last years, a lot of things happened. In Italy, it's not at all, because we still don't have, for example, a law that condemns homophobic violence crimes.
Really?
No, we don't. So if something happens, that police officers report it as no apparent reason violence crime.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So it's not a hate crime, as
No,
we would call
no,
it.
yeah.
Oh my god.
Yeah, so it was definitely political since the very beginning.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And again, sort of without spoilers, but with your film, that there are some feminist issues, I think, in terms of the way that women are treated, and particularly of a certain generation, a certain era. Did you want to speak to that a little bit?
I mean, it's interesting, because the first question I got at the Q&A in the screening was whether I thought it was to do with the era my parents were in, and actually, I'm not convinced that much has changed. You know, that I mean, basically, the film, I think I will give us a spoiler.
Yeah, go for it. It's your choice.
But, you know, yeah, I mean, the film deals with psychological abuse, and it's just so interesting how many people then relate it to stories in their own lives. And I think the film is particularly about, I guess, the myth that abusive relationships are mainly in working class families, and, you know, I think psychological abuse particularly happens amongst middle class families. I think I see nodding already, you know, and so I don't, and how I describe it, I think often relationships and within the home, I feel like that's the coal face for women in sexism. You know, that's the immediate battleground for a lot of us, and it's really not exposed often. And you know, there's this whole idea of what's behind closed doors, and actually that's the struggle for a lot of women. So I do think it's actually just as pertinent and important today, you know.
Sadly so.
Yeah.
And I think there's a link between your film and Sadie's, because both of you kind of have sort of dramatic reconstructions in a way.
Right.
I mean, Sadie, you've obviously got an actor playing Mary Clark. Can you talk me through a little bit the process of that? 'Cause I think you do that beautifully, how you portray that.
I think it's a really difficult thing to do, and I've watched so many documentaries where it doesn't work, and I kind of I wasn't sure I wanted to do it, but I just felt like there were excerpts in the book that Mary's like 92 now, and she's obviously couldn't be interviewed, but I wanted to kind of have some words from the book that I kind of rewrote and kind of bookend each kind of act in the film. And I found this likeness with Camilla Rutherford. She's just, you know, the way we styled it, and it's kind of going to be something I'm going to work with in my next documentary. But we shot it on Super 8 film, and it kind of just blends into the rest, but it gives it a kind of, the rest of the film, it gives it a sense of humour, it gives it a texture, and it's like, I wanted the film to be funny and sexy and coquettish, and you know, that's what Mary, you know, she was as a designer and a woman, and you know, she was, you know, in the late 50s started designing clothes for women, and basically was saying to women, you know, be yourself, free yourself, and you know, she was like one of the first women that kind of paved the way to open up, like, you know, women to be more expressive and independent, and she was saying no to the men in the grey suits, which I've experienced my whole life too. So, you know, it was amazing she was doing it years and years ago.
Yeah, and it's probably sadly still happening, but Welcome, Mounia.
So
Hello.
sorry. I'm so
No
sorry.
problem. Good to have you with us. I'm Anna. I'm hosting today.
That was a very secret room that I couldn't
Oh, it is actually a tricky one. I've been around the Labour Hotel for
Yes.
an hour.
No, for 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
I was 10 minutes late, I'm sorry.
That's no
I had my
worries.
screening.
It's Mounia Akl, who made the wonderful Costa Brava Lebanon. Congratulations on your film. Thank you for joining us. We've been talking a little bit about how it feels to have your film at London Film Festival. How are you feeling about it?
I'm very emotional actually, because the screenings have been really intimate and the audience has been very open-hearted, and there's been a lot of also Lebanese expats or Lebanese people who have left Lebanon after what happened, and so I feel like I'm very moved.
Yeah.
I feel really in touch with my emotions thanks to the audience.
That's good.
And I know Laura because we were together at Torino Film Lab and Cine Fondation. So
Yeah, we know each
so
other
happy
since a
to
very
see
long
her.
time.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's great. Good. I'm glad to reunite you.
Yes.
Thank you.
So for people who haven't seen your film, could you set it up for them and just tell us a little bit more about it?
Of course.
Thank you.
My film is the story of a family, a Lebanese family that moves to the Lebanese mountains away from the city because they feel like the city is no longer safe and is filled with too much chaos and danger for them. So when we meet this family, they've created a self-sustainable paradise away from the city, but that paradise is broken when the government decides to build a big illegal garbage landfill in the land outside their fence. And this outside pressure actually brings out the demons inside the family.
Yeah. Well, congratulations again. It's a beautiful film. Now we've been talking a bit about feminism as well, and do you feel in your film that there are some kind of strands there? I think the answer is yes. But, you know, in terms of gender and any issues that you were keen to bring out in particular in that.
Yeah, I think because the movie has a lot of female characters. It's one man, Walid, and then there's Suraya, the mother, the two daughters, 8-year-old and teen, and then the grandma. And I think, I mean, I grew up in a family that was filled with women with one man, but I think that there's a lot of things that I want to talk about, but without thinking I'm making a feminist film, more like I'm telling what I know about the society I grew up in, which happens to be an extremely patriarchal society. And men are often as much victims of that society as women. And I think that, for example, the character of the teenager throughout the film realizes, you know what, I don't want to please others anymore. And that's what the arrival of the garbage does to her. It awakens her curiosity that her father tries to narrow down. Or for the mother, for example, she thinks, well, I can be a mom and I can be an artist, and it's okay. It's okay to be both. And I think for the father in the film, he understands the importance of accepting to change for the people you love, which is, I think, unrelated to feminism, in that case more to human relationships. So I think making a feminist film for a Lebanese director is an accidental thing, because it just happens so that my society has a lot of flaws.
Thank you for that, yeah. Sadie, you were talking about the men in grey suits earlier, saying no to everything, and that's an interesting way to phrase it, very vivid. I'd love to hear from all of you actually about the obstacles that you have faced as filmmakers, but perhaps specifically as female filmmakers, and how you've overcome them. So if we start with you, Sadie.
I think, starting off as an actress, and in those days, like literally in the 80s, and there would be very few women on set, and like now, obviously the balance is becoming more equal, or women just had the token roles, or just the makeup artist, or whatever. I was part of a film company called Natural Nylon. I was the only woman, and it was with Ewan McGregor and Jude Law, and I felt like I was just a token woman, and everyone would kind of, I was definitely ganged up upon in a kind of cute way, but it was just like annoying. But then I started a film company with another woman, but I was still, what was interesting, like there's so many more kind of, we acknowledge so much more and all that kind of stuff, but the finance often comes from men, and the finance arms, and then they will prioritise, there is the boys club in that kind of world, and I think that's a shame that there's not more women in positions to help finance, and so that's frustrating. But I think you just got to be more determined. I went away and did an MA in how women in film are affected by having kids, because I was fed up with people telling me that like, why has your career not gone as the way you wanted it to go, like being an actress or a producer or fashion designer or whatever. And I'm like, I've got 4 children, I'm a single mum, and they're like, no, well, it doesn't really affect, and I was like, well, it does, because I have to do sports day, I have to do this, I have to do that, and I pick up the bits of my career in between children, not, having a bit more time. So I did that master's in that subject, and it's really interesting because my kids have just all left home, and now I'm getting all these opportunities because I've got more freedom. But the thing is, it's the men in the grey suits seem to me to be running the finance side of it, and that's the area which is difficult to get things off the ground. So I'd like anybody know any women in finance, I'd love to meet them.
Brilliant. Thank you for that.
Oh, I don't know where to begin.
Yeah.
How long have you got? So, I mean, originally I did an MA in screenwriting, and I pitched a version of the film, which it was more focused on, my mum had postpartum psychosis, and I remember being told, what relevance does that have today? Because it had happened in the 1970s, and it is almost comical. And at the time, I mean, I was in my 20s, and I don't think I was strong enough to say, well, women still get it today. And actually, even back then, the treatment women were still being separated from their newborn babies, and all the issues were the same. So I just went away and was like, oh, And then I wrote a script about something different, and was told over and over and over again, it's a great script, and it actually got optioned over a long period of time. It got optioned 3 different times. It's a great script, but obviously you can't direct it. Do you know what I mean? You won't be directing it. And then actually the script was plagiarised. Yes, some scenes from it, and I found that so bruising. And if I'm honest, I do think that plagiarism happens towards women more often than men.
Interesting.
My sister trains as an artist, and it's her experience as well. It's kind of like, oh, I could have done that. Well, I might as well have done that because I could have done it. That's the kind of, I think, the narrative, voicing the internal narrative. And at that point, I think, and that's when I started making first-person films, because I think the plagiarism was so difficult. I mean, the film that was made was, was released, that I started making films that were so deeply personal, no one could take them from me.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, there's no way anyone could.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, at the same time, I was, to be fair, I was making the project and realising that actually in order to contain these different narratives, well, again, I think it relates to feminism, I do think it's a privilege to present something as being objective. And I think most women and people not from the Western world and black people know that no one is objective, because what we're hearing all the time is a narrative that is presented as objective that we know is not, because it's from a very male-centric point of view. So I think there's a way in which first-person filmmaking can contain that, whereas I do think quite a lot of filmmakers start off by writing about their families but present it as a kind of fiction that's an objective story, and quite often the women in those stories I struggle with some of the depictions. Anyway, I'll stop there, but as you can see, I'm quite passionate about it.
I feel like I could do a whole podcast on this subject. It's fascinating.
I have thought about it so much, but because it's taken me so long to make this film, if I'm honest, I've wanted to make a feature film for 20 years, and it's taken me that long to get to this point. And I always promised myself that, like, when I get a platform to talk about it, I will, So, yeah.
Quite right.
Yeah, but it's also like a really wide topic.
Yeah,
exactly. To talk about. So,
Yeah.
So the things that come to my mind are more connected to what my education was in a way, because I grew up in a family which is really equalitarian, so I would say feminist in this sense. And my parents let me decide whatever I wanted, basically. And one of these things was directing, potentially. But I didn't know at the time the meaning of the word patronizing.
Right.
No, really, I've been never heard it before. No, like never.
Literally,
Yeah, so I learned it on my skin while I was attending the school. And I was, we were like 2 girls surrounded by men in directing class. And I couldn't understand why the situation was always like, oh, are you feeling good today? Like, are you having your period? And I was like, what? Something really rude to ask,
Yeah.
If you get angry, I mean, something that all of us experience, so like, okay. Does this mean that I cannot direct you today? Anyway, this was the situation at the time, and while shooting Small Body, I surrounded myself progressively, because we did a lot of shifts during the shooting, because we were shooting during pandemic. So we went on and off 4 times. It's more like a TV series as a workflow rather than a film. It took 1 year, and during all these shifts, we changed a lot the components of the crew. And I understood that basically there is, at least to me, no difference in collaborators like male or females. But it's like the only filter I'm using in a way is being surrounded by people that push me instead of pulling me.
Oh,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. And Mounia, what obstacles have you overcome
As a woman,
as a woman?
I will say one thing about the Lebanese film industry is that because it's an industry that's made of rebels, the film industry in Lebanon, the men in it are very different than the men outside of it. And so I felt like I can protect myself from the men that pushed me down, or were patronizing, with the men that are in the film industry, because they were men that didn't find themselves connected to how the system works, because they're outside of the system. So I actually found a lot of comfort in the film industry because it's made of that. But just to take the conversation elsewhere, because I agree with everything that's been saying, so not to repeat the same thing, I found that an obstacle the way I experienced the patriarchal society on a personal level is in the relationship it created, my relationship it created with my own body, because I live in a society also where you feel like how you look, I mean everywhere, not just in Lebanon, is associated with how well or not you're respected. And I was obsessed with my weight all my life, because even my father, who's the person who loves me the most, would say just things like, for example, which you will see in the film, but like, it's not an autobiographical film in that sense, but just, he says at some point, why do you drink while you're eating? You're gonna gain weight, or like that, or things like, for example, like, you know, now that you're in the film industry, it's good for you not to like gain too much weight because you have to appear, or things like that, and so somehow you start understanding that your relationship to your body has been defined by people who don't understand your body. And I think that was something that I learned throughout the years to disconnect from and to free myself from. Yeah, you probably didn't think I would go there, but
That was
just
really another whole
Yeah.
brilliant, fascinating subject, and I'm sorry that that
No,
you
no,
had to
no,
overcome
not at all.
that.
No, I
but,
think we're all learning.
but I think it's really, really rich territory to discuss. But it's time for me to stop talking and ask the audience if they have any questions. Pop your hand up if you've got one over there.
So this is to anybody, but how do you feel about men telling a story about women? So at the London Film Festival, they were screening last night in Soho, and Naked was remastered, and they both touch on feminist subjects, but it's directed by a man. So do you think that that's a grey area, or what do you feel about that? Do you think it should be strictly female directors?
I think I would like to direct men as well, so I think they're totally, like, they've been doing it for longer than us, of course, but I would like to direct a lot of men in the future and to talk about, how do you say that, masculine topics somehow from my perspective.
absolutely.
So
Yeah.
I think it's interesting.
I think
Yeah.
some men could really capture female stories. I worked with Tom Beard, who I produced a film called Two for Joy, which Billy Piper and Samantha Morton starred in. But he's doing another film about 3 generations of women, and I think because he was so sensitive and grew up in whatever, he really writes women's characters beautifully. And so I always feel like it should be inclusive, and I don't like this thing of like segregating, saying you can't talk about this because you don't have an I think you can experience things and understand things if you're not that person, and I think it would be really annoying if for freedom of writers, if you're kind of told, or directors, that you can only stick to that. I mean, it just gets, it's too rigid.
Absolutely. No, I want men to be making films, feminist films. Absolutely, we need men to be making feminist films, and actually I've started seeing, even in this festival, there's some really interesting films exploring the patriarchy. I was on a panel with a couple of other filmmakers who had done films about their families, and both of them were exploring those issues. I think the key is research, that if you're going to make a film where you're exploring something that you haven't experienced, you do the research, and that's what good filmmakers do, and absolutely I want to make films about men's experience and people's experience that I haven't had. It would be terribly confining if we could only make films about what we've experienced,
I think, about research. I think that's the most important thing. You can be a woman and not portray a character faithfully because you haven't done your research well, and vice versa. I think if you're talking about something you don't know, then you have a big responsibility to really research it and invite to the conversation those who really know it.
Thank you.
Do you think that James Bond character should be a woman?
Classic. Anyone want to take that one? Should James Bond be a woman?
I'm open to, whoever's the right. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it has to be a man, but it really is. I mean, I think the thing is, it's down to the producers. I mean, Barbara Broccoli's got a very clear idea, hasn't she, of what she wants. So it's her legacy, and that's what she feels. But I wouldn't bother me. But it's quite nice. Like the female roles in this James Bond are pretty good. Much better than we've had to deal with before.
Agreed. Moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
Right. So that was the last question. Then I'm afraid we're going to wrap up. Sadly, I know we could all sit here chatting for ages. Like certainly I could, because you've all been absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much.
you.
Congratulations again, and thank you.